corrupt former cop and convicted killer Roger Rogerson has died in hospital at the age of 83 after a medical episode in his jail cell on Thursday night.
Today, after a 3-week trial, jurors found Kerry Peck guilty of misconduct in a public office after she began a relationship with the Liverpool drug gang boss at HMP Curtin.
Ever wondered what happens when corrupt prison guards end up behind bars? No badge, no protection, just survival? Well, I guess we're about to find out. Here's what really happens to corrupt prison guards in jail.
Linda D'Souza Abreu, stand up. The sentence on you is one of 15 months imprisonment.
January 6th, 2025, 31-year-old Linda D'Souza Abreu, former prison officer at HMP Wandsworth in London, was given 15 months behind bars after a viral video exposed her having some fun with an inmate inside his cell. But before that scandal even broke out, Linda had a life that kind of raised some eyebrows. Originally from Brazil and holding a Portuguese passport, she was married to an MMA fighter and had an 8-year-old daughter. She also was on Channel 4's open house, The Great Experiment, a show about swinger couples, where she criticized monogamy, calling it a social construct. On top of that, she would run an OnlyFans account under names like Linda from the Playroom and La Madre, sharing explicit content alongside her husband. So in June 2024, while working as a prison officer at HMP Wandsworth in London with that wonderful resume, everything came crashing down for her. A video came out showing Linda having sex with an inmate, Linton Weirich, a convicted burglar, right there in his prison cell. Another prisoner would film this while casually smoking weed and providing commentary, and yeah, it went viral fast, with police launching a formal investigation almost immediately. That same month, Linda's arrested at Heathrow Airport while trying to board a flight to Madrid with her father. She denied trying to flee the country, but the timing certainly didn't help with that case. And then in July 2024, she pled guilty to misconduct in public office at Isleworth Crown Court. Now, during court proceedings, it was shown Linda had engaged in consensual sex with Weirich on 3 separate occasions over just a few days, one of which was accidentally recorded on her body-worn prison camera. And she also admitted to another sexual act on the very same day the viral video was filmed. Now, in her defense, a friend named Haley claimed that inmates had discovered Linda's OnlyFans page, tracked down her home address and her husband's name, and used the information to manipulate her. But the prosecution comes out and says this is entirely false, while pointing out that Linda never once reported any threat, and subsequently a psychiatric report diagnosed her with severe borderline personality disorder and ADHD. It described her as highly impulsive and said she often used sex as a way to deal with emotional distress, like billions of people. Her lawyer, though, Rajiv Menon KC, argued that her mental health should reduce her culpability, but Judge Martin Edmonds KC didn't let her off the hook. He called her an enthusiastic participant and emphasized how her behavior had undermined prison discipline and triggered major issues for other staff, especially other female officers, who are now getting harassed by inmates. Some of the CO's children were even teased at school because of assumptions about their mother's conduct. So, on January 6th, 2025, Linda D'Souza Abreu was officially sentenced to 15 months in prison, but her behavior didn't exactly scream remorse. Just before her sentencing, another video surfaces online. This time, she's at a London club making jokes about her court-ordered ankle monitor, calling it very mindful and very cutesy. Now that rubbed a lot of people in the wrong way, with some even calling her sentencing a soft justice because it technically didn't send a strong enough message. And following the sentencing, Linda's sent to HMP Bronzefield, a high-security women's prison in Surrey, and she's reportedly housed in House Block 4, alongside some of the UK's most notorious female offenders, including Lucy Letby, Rose West, Mareed Philpott, and Joanna Dennehy. Former inmates have painted a grim picture of Bronzefield, with some emphasizing the poor food quality, even though they get some nice porridge or even boiled eggs on Sundays. They get their food through this electronic pod system, and some inmates in this block get access to a private shower, depending on how high risk they are. But here's the crazy part. In June 2025, after serving just 5 months, Linda's released on license due to a mix of good behavior and prison overcrowding. Oh, in the UK, inmates can be released after serving just a third of their sentence. And let's just say Linda was one of the lucky ones to get out. Wonder why? But I've got to be honest with you. A lot. And I mean, a lot of people aren't happy that this lady's out. They see the justice system being way too lenient with these OnlyFans models, especially considering how outrageous and depraved her crime actually was. And her friend Haley has once again come to the rescue like some hero without a cape, claiming Linda's a loving person who simply made a terrible mistake. But of course, nobody wants to hear this crap right now. Regardless, though, because of what she did and the virality of the incident, Linda might have to deal with the stigma for a long, long time.
Well, next, and the former governor of Kirkham Prison in Lancashire, who had an illicit relationship with an inmate, has been jailed for 9 years.
May 16th, 2025, we have Carrie Pegg, 42 years old, former prison governor, once considered a rising star in the UK prison service. And she's sentenced to 9 years in prison. What's her crime? A relationship that stretched too far with a notorious drug dealer. Now, Pegg began her career in the prison service back in 2012 as a graduate entrant, and she rose fast, working in facilities like Risley, Liverpool, and Style, before eventually becoming governor of HMP Kirkham in Lancashire in April 2018. However, it's while she was here that everything just went out of control. Somehow, in some weird way, Pegg got involved with Anthony Saunderson, a major drug trafficker from Liverpool serving 10 years at Kirkham. Now, Saunderson was a serious player in the criminal world, using aliases like Jesse Pinkman from Breaking Bad and even James Gandolfini. Now, once they met, Pegg started spending an unusual amount of time with him, often alone with him in her office behind closed doors. Naturally, her coworkers are getting suspicious, and around October 2018, she crosses a major red line. Pegg approved Saunderson's temporary release on license, even though she didn't have the authority to do so, violating strict prison procedures. But their relationship just kept blossoming. After Saunderson's release, they kept in touch, and he even gifted her a 12,000-pound Mercedes C-Class, paid for with profits from a 34-kilo amphetamine deal he struck with certain dealers. Now, keep in mind that while all this was happening, different law enforcement agencies are keeping a close eye on him, and after getting a search warrant, they stormed Pegg's home in Oral Wigan, where they found Saunderson's DNA on a toothbrush and Hugo Boss flip-flops, plus a burner phone used solely to communicate with him. And as they're digging deeper, they found out she's broke, like very broke. Despite Pegg earning around 3,000 pounds a month, she'd maxed out all 4 of her credit cards, had 6 pounds in savings, and was living way beyond her means, buying luxury items like Jimmy Choo shoes and Chanel jewelry, making investigators believe that, she's with Saunderson for the financial gain. Now, Pegg insisted that she was naive and denied any wrongdoing while Saunderson was in prison. She said his DNA was on her toothbrush because he took it to work. The jury's not buying this. They convicted her of 2 counts of misconduct in public office and 1 count of possessing criminal property. She's sentenced to 9 years for the first misconduct charge, 2 years for the second, 4 years for the criminal property offense. All to run at the same time. Now, we don't know exactly where she's housed, as it's not disclosed, probably for her own security, but she's likely in a place like HMP Style, which is ironically one of the prisons where she once worked. Life there is tightly structured, with early starts around 7 a.m., roll calls, basic meals, and assigned chores or low-paid jobs like cleaning or working in a workshop. Now, her resume could make her a target, so she'll need to tread carefully with both staff and other inmates. And while she may be able to access education or rehabilitation programs, her background can make it harder to build trust. If she maintains good behavior, Pegg could be released after serving 4 to 5 years. But even then, she'll be coming out of a system she once helped run, only this time having experienced it from the inside, paying the price for what the judge called her catastrophically compromised decisions.
Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer convicted of murdering George Floyd, attacked in a federal prison, and he was seriously injured.
He was stabbed 22 times last week, and he's serving time at a federal prison in Arizona.
Now, former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin wasn't a prison guard, but with everything that's happened to him behind bars, we just couldn't leave him off this video. Because what he's experienced while incarcerated is a brutal taste of what many corrupt cops face when they mess with the wrong people. And in Chauvin's case, he didn't just mess with someone, he messed with everyone. When back in May 2020, he commits one of the most outrageous and horrifying acts ever caught on camera by a corrupt cop, by kneeling on George Floyd's neck for over 9 minutes. That moment didn't just lead to Floyd's tragic death. It ignited a global movement, protests erupting in nearly every corner of the world. You see, that day, if you don't know, Floyd, a 46-year-old black man, had been arrested after allegedly using a counterfeit $20 bill. So handcuffed and lying face down on the pavement, he kept saying, "I can't breathe," over and over again. But Wonder Cop Chauvin didn't let up. Despite Floyd's obvious distress and desperate pleas from bystanders, Chauvin kept that pressure on. The entire thing's caught on camera, and the footage goes viral, fueling the already growing Black Lives Matter movement and sparking protests all over the world. So in 2021, Chauvin's found guilty of unintentional second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. He's sentenced to 22.5 years in state prison. On top of that, he pled guilty to federal charges for violating Floyd's civil rights, as well as for a separate 2017 case where he used excessive force on a boy, and that federal plea got him a concurrent 21-year sentence. Now, Chauvin and his legal team try to challenge the verdicts, arguing that the publicity and threat of civil unrest meant he didn't get a fair trial. But in 2023, both the Minnesota Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court denied his appeals. After the case, more light was shed on Chauvin's history in law enforcement. And as it turns out, looks like his record included numerous complaints and use of force incidents. Plus, the scrutiny didn't stop with him alone. His wife, Kelly, filed for divorce shortly after Floyd's death, and was later sentenced to probation over tax fraud related to their joint filings. But now let's talk about Chauvin's life behind bars, because right after his sentencing, he's placed in solitary confinement at a max security prison in Minnesota for his own safety. And then in August 2022, he's moved to FCI Tucson, a medium security federal prison. But even there, safety's not guaranteed. And then on November 24th, 2023, Black Friday of all days, Chauvin's attacked in the prison's law library. He's stabbed 22 times by John Turskak, a former member of the Mexican Mafia and one-time FBI informant. Turskak later admitted he targeted Chauvin because of his notoriety and deliberately chose Black Friday as a symbolic date. Chauvin survived, though, thanks to an emergency medical care, but he was seriously injured. His lawyer blasted the prison system for failing to prevent the attack, especially since Tursak had managed to get his hands on a makeshift knife. So after that incident, Chauvin the Coward was shuffled to the lower security prison in Big Spring, Texas, and then briefly held at the Federal Transfer Center in Oklahoma City. Oh, even now, Chauvin continues to face serious risks in prison due to his high-profile case and his past as a wonder cop. And while federal prisons tend to be more secure than state ones, FCI Tucson had already been under fire for past security failures. So right now, Chauvin probably spends a lot of time in isolation for his protection and has limited access to things like recreational and educational programs. His legal team and family remain worried about his safety, though, and he's still trying to fight his federal conviction. He's leaning on a claim from a pathologist who argues that George Floyd didn't actually die because of Chauvin's actions. Wow, that appeal's a long shot, and if it doesn't work, Chauvin's not eligible for release until 2038, which we doubt he'll ever make it to. May 2006, former prison guard Gary Hayward was convicted of running a drug smuggling operation inside of Rikers Island, one of New York's most infamous jails. But it wasn't just about drugs here. He would also pimp out female COs to other inmates, all for profit. And we know that sounds very hard to believe, but just walk with us and let us tell you all about it. Hayward grows up in the tough Polo Grounds project in Harlem, surrounded by poverty and constant struggle. But at 19, he joins the Marines and ends up serving in Operation Desert Storm from 90 to 91. He gets some military decorations and leaves the service with an honorable discharge, which was pretty impressive. But when he gets back to New York, things didn't fall into place. He struggles to find steady work, moved back in with his mom, and was weighed down by child support after a divorce left him with limited access to his 2 kids. Then in 1996, he thought he caught a break. He gets accepted to the New York City Department of Corrections Academy. He started working at Rikers Island, making $28,000 a year, which, to be fair, is pretty crap, but it's a lifeline. And it was his shot to support his family and get back on his feet. Don't judge him yet. However, things quickly spiral out of control for Hayward. He's struggling with child support, gambling debts to, pay the child support. and personal drama. He gave into the very corruption his academy warned about. He started small, smuggling cigarettes into Rikers, and then kind of escalated to cocaine, liquor, and cell phones. All for profit here, right? He would partner with inmate Flacco. Hayward would make thousands, funding new apartments, a car, and now his gambling addiction. Oh, his operation gets so bold, he even arranges deliveries through inmates' family members, one of which reportedly involved payment in the form of a sexual favor. But the wildest part, Hayward claimed he ran a prostitution ring inside the jail. According to him, 3 female COs, who he nicknamed copstitutes, were sleeping with inmates and jail bosses for money. He said he offered them protection in return for helping move his contraband. And it didn't stop inside Rikers. Hayward admitted to using his badge and gun off-duty to rob a crack house in the Bronx because why not? And then he shot his way out with an accomplice. But eventually Hayward's double life caught up with him. After an inmate snitched, authorities caught him on video dealing drugs with an inmate's sister. He pled guilty in 2006 and was sentenced to 2 years in prison. He served 2 years in a medium-security prison, where the strict routine and sudden shift from being in charge to having no power would have been a tough adjustment. The mental toll would have also been pretty heavy, but since inmates saw him as a good cop, he kind of stayed out of trouble. And after he's released, he turns that experience into a cautionary tale about the cost of corruption. And whether people believe every detail or not, his story is undeniably intense.
Tonight, a former Colorado police officer has been sentenced to 14 months in jail in the death of Elijah McClain. Randy Rodema was convicted of criminally negligent homicide.
A jury delivered verdicts for 2 officers who arrested him. He died after he was subdued by police and injected with ketamine by paramedics.
In October 2023, Randy Rodema, a former police officer from Aurora, Colorado, was convicted of criminal negligent homicide and third-degree assault for his role in the 2019 death of Elijah McClain, a 23-year-old black man who did absolutely nothing wrong other than wear a balaclava mask. On the night of August 24th, 2019, McClain was simply walking home from a convenience store wearing a ski mask because his anemia made him feel cold. But a 911 caller described him as sketchy, which led officers Nathan Woodyard, Jason Rosenblatt, and Rodema to respond. And what happened next escalated way out of proportion. Body cam footage shows that within seconds of arriving, Officer Woodyard grabbed McClain and the 3 officers wrestle him to the ground. Rodema in particular is accused of using excessive force as he slammed McClain down, twisting his arm, pinning his knee into McClain's back. Now keep in mind, McClain repeatedly said he can't breathe and was actually choking on his own vomit during this struggle. Subsequently, paramedics Jeremy Cooper and Peter Sachunich arrived and gave McClain 500 milligrams of ketamine. That's way too much for his 143-pound frame. And then on the way to the hospital, McClain goes into cardiac arrest. He's later declared brain dead and dies on August 30th, 2019. According to this autopsy, the cause was ketamine toxicity. Now, out of the 3 officers involved, Rodema was the only one convicted. Rosenblatt and Woodyard were acquitted in separate trials. As for the paramedics who thought it was a brilliant idea to load this kid up with a lot of ketamine, well, they were both found guilty of criminally negligent homicide. Sachunich received a 5-year prison sentence, and Cooper gets 14 months of work release. On January 5th, 2024, Rodema sentenced to 14 months in county jail with work release for the assault charge and 4 years of probation with 200 hours of community service for the homicide charge. Both sentences are being served at the same time. The judge acknowledges Rodema's clean record, though. His military service, where he was wounded in Iraq in 2007, and his apparent potential for rehabilitation. But he also called out Rodema's shocking indifference to McClain's suffering. Prosecutors had pushed for the maximum sentence, 3 years in prison. But Rodema's defense team argued that he'd be at risk in jail as a former cop. Elijah's family also mentioned that Rodema's sentence was really light. Rodema began serving his sentence on March 22, 2024 at Adams County Jail. But by June, he's already asking to have his work release sentence changed to in-home detention. His lawyer said that he's mentally struggling, reporting severe depression, paranoia, PTSD from his military service that had worsened behind bars now, and a 30-pound weight loss. One of the biggest fears was being attacked by other inmates, especially since he'd previously worked as a jail deputy in Denver and had even supervised one of the inmates now locked up with him. And to make it worse, he's not taking his anxiety medication out of fear that it might interfere with drug testing requirements. He can't attend the church or in-person therapy, and his legal team argued that switching to home detention would still keep him confined, but in a safer environment. Yeah, unlike the work release program, home detention would last 10 months with no good time credit, meaning no shot at early release. So, what's it like for him in jail right now? Well, he's in county jail, not state prison, and that matters. County jails are typically for shorter stays and offer fewer rehab programs. Rodema's on a work release plan, meaning he can leave during the day to work, but gotta go back to the jail at night. It gives him some kind of glimpse of normal life, but he's still locked up and dealing with the risks of that environment. If he's granted home detention, he'll avoid most direct threats, but it's not gonna be easy. He'll have to probably wear an ankle monitor, follow strict rules, and live under tight supervision. So, it's a different kind of confinement. Safer, yeah, but still far from free.
Grant Hardin escaped from the Calico Rock prison in Arkansas last month and was captured almost 2 weeks later. He was serving time for a murder and rape charge.
Convicted murderer and former Arkansas Police Chief Grant Hardin is back in police custody. This after a 13-day manhunt.
Grant Hardin used to be a police chief in Arkansas, but today he's notorious for his crimes, a shocking prison escape, and the nickname Devil in the Ozarks. So, how did this guy go from good cop to bad cop in less than a decade? So for context, Hardin had a long career in law enforcement, hopping around departments across Arkansas. He served as an officer in Fayetteville, Huntsville, and Eureka Springs, and for a brief stint, he was even the police chief in Gateway, a small town near the Arkansas-Missouri border. But his resume wasn't as impressive as it looked. He was fired from Fayetteville PD, resigned from Eureka Springs after faking a police report, and was accused more than once of using excessive force and showing poor judgment. When Gateway hired him in 2016, he only lasted 4 months before the city council kicked him out. The reason? Erratic behavior, like pulling guns on citizens and holding dangerous grudges. By the time he commits his most infamous crime, Hardin's not even a cop anymore. He's working as a CO at Northwest Arkansas Community Correction Center in Fayetteville. And then comes February 2017. That's when Hardin shot and killed 59-year-old James Appleton, an employee of Gateway's water department. Appleton had been talking with his brother-in-law, then Mayor Andrew Tillman, when Hardin pulled the trigger, and to this day, the motive remains murky. But the 23 Max documentary Devil in the Ozarks floated the theory that Hardin had a grudge over a past argument with Appleton, something to do with fixing a police car. A witness placed Hardin at the scene, saying he waved him past Appleton's truck, and seconds later, they heard the gunshot. Later that same day, police found Hardin calmly eating dinner with his family. He's arrested without a fight. In October 2017, he pleads guilty to first-degree murder and is given 30 years. But we're not finished yet. While serving time, DNA evidence links him to a cold case from 1997. That year, Amy Harrison, a 27-year-old teacher, was raped at Frank Tillery Elementary School in Rogers. It happened on a Sunday while a church service was going on nearby, and the attacker, later confirmed to be Hardin, who was an officer in Eureka Springs at the time, wore a stocking cap, sunglasses, and carried a gun. In 2018, he pleads guilty to rape and kidnapping, earning him another 50 years behind bars. At this point, it was clear Hardin's going to spend the rest of his life in prison, but he wasn't going to let that happen. May 25th, 2025, Hardin, now 56, pulled off a prison break straight out of a movie. While being held at the North Central Unit in Calico Rock, a medium security prison, he disguised himself in a fake CO outfit, black pants, black t-shirt, baseball cap, and what looked like body armor. Pushing a cart with loaded wooden pallets, he walked right through a secure gate that a guard opened without checking his ID. Surveillance shows him leaving the prison at exactly 2:55 p.m. Unfortunately, a heavy rainstorm rolled in, making it almost impossible for tracking dogs to pick up his trail. Still, the escape kicked off a massive manhunt involving the feds, U.S. Marshals, Arkansas State Police, and BORTAC. That's Border Patrol's elite tactical team. Authorities offered a $25,000 reward and feared Hardin might hide out in a dense Ozark terrain. using caves and abandoned buildings that he knew pretty well. His escape literally rattled everyone, because no one knew what this guy was capable of. I mean, he'd been a police officer for so long, if there was anyone who could escape the cops successfully, it's probably this guy. But despite rumors that he'd fled the state, he didn't get far. On June 6th, 2025, 12 days after his escape, Hardin's found just a mile and a half from the prison, near Moccasin Creek in Izard County. Tracking dogs finally picked up that scent, and ironically, that same heavy rain that helped him escape also kept him close to the area, limiting his movement through the woods. Hardin now faces an additional charge for second-degree escape and has been moved to Varner Supermax, a high-security prison in Lincoln County. Life there's a whole different story compared to North Central, where he used to work in the kitchen and even completed an anger management course in 2019. At Varner, inmates are isolated, monitored, nonstop, and live under tight restrictions. As a high-risk, high-profile inmate with a violent past and a background in law enforcement, Hardin's probably on the strictest watch possible. His world is now a small concrete cell, maybe 8 to 10 feet, with just a basic bed, a combo toilet sink, and limited personal items. Natural light comes through a very tiny window, if at all, and there's constant surveillance with regular cell checks. He'll maybe get an hour of recreation a day, alone inside a caged area, and he'll eat by himself. Hardin will have little to no social interaction, especially because he's a huge target in here, and any program or therapy is going to be limited. If he's allowed visitors at all, it's going to be no contact, heavily monitored, and probably rare since his family has stayed quiet even during his escape. Probably embarrassed. So, with a 30-year sentence for murder, 50 years for rape, and now more time for escaping, this guy's probably gonna die in prison. And if there's anything we know about Arkansas, it's that they're very tough when it comes to parole for violent offenders, and his overall reputation won't win him any favors. So, basically, yeah, Hardin better get comfortable in there, 'cause it's over for him.
President Biden has announced he is commuting the sentences of most of the federal prisoners on death row, and that includes infamous former NOPD officer Len Davis.
Former police officer Len Davis ordered a hitman to kill a New Orleans mother.
Len Davis used to be a New Orleans cop, but he wasn't famous for keeping the streets safe. In fact, he was infamous for quite the opposite, being a ruthless criminal. Now, early on in his life, Davis joined the New Orleans Police Department and quickly earned a reputation for being aggressive and abusive. People called him the Desire Terrorist because of the way he operated in the Desire housing projects. By the early 90s, it became clear Davis wasn't just a bad cop. Federal prosecutors believed he was running a full-blown criminal operation from inside the PD. According to prosecutors, Davis wasn't only abusing his power. Man, this guy was the ringleader of a drug trafficking network. He used his badge to protect drug dealers, stir up violence, and cover up crime by falsifying reports. Still, the most disturbing part of his story would come in 1994, when he orchestrated the murder of Kim Groves, a 32-year-old mother of 3. Groves had filed a complaint against Davis and his partner, accusing him of beating a young boy in their neighborhood. Now, instead of facing any accountability, Davis arranged to have Groves killed. He calls in a hitman, and just a day after she makes that report, Groves was gunned down. But what Davis didn't know was that the feds were already watching him. The FBI had been running a sting on corrupt NOPD officers, and they had Davis on wiretap. They recorded him talking about drug deals, violence, and even given the order to kill Groves. So, in 1996, he's convicted of civil rights violations tied to her death, along with multiple charges for drug trafficking and racketeering. That same year, a federal jury sentences him to death by lethal injection. But in 1999, the sentence is overturned because of legal issues. Yet, in 2005, a new jury reaffirms that death penalty, once again sentencing him to die for his crimes. Now, Groves wasn't the only victim of Davis's corruption. He once gave false information to another case that led to 3 innocent men, Bernell Jalouk, Kunta Gable, and Leroy Nelson, being wrongfully convicted of murder. These poor guys spent decades behind bars before their convictions were finally overturned in 2022. The Orleans Parish DA's office under Jason Williams reviewed the case and found that Davis's lies played a major role in those wrongful convictions. And that same review triggered a broader investigation into other cases Davis may have tainted, highlighting just how much long-term damage he caused. Now fast forward to December 2024. President Joe frickin' Biden commuted the death sentences of 37 federal inmates, including Len Davis, reducing them to life without parole. That left just 3 people on federal death row, but surprisingly, Davis didn't want clemency. At age 60, he filed a handwritten motion in federal court in Indiana asking for his death sentence to be reinstated. I mean, yeah, he really did that. From his cell at the U.S. Penitentiary Terre Haute, he argues that his commutation was unconstitutional since he hadn't requested it and didn't accept it. Now, regardless, he continues to claim he's innocent, arguing that the government didn't have the authority to charge him with civil rights violations, and said that the whole case was riddled with misconduct. So Davis believes that keeping his death sentence in place would draw attention to what he sees as flaws in his trial. Now, assuming the courts reject Davis's request and he stays in prison for life, his future, let's just say, by the way, there is no future. This guy's 60 years old, serving time in one of the toughest prisons in the U.S. And honestly, whether he's executed or not, life in USB Terre Haute, for someone with his criminal background, it's almost as harsh as death itself.
2 former New York City police detectives have been sentenced to life behind bars after being convicted of racketeering and 8 murders carried out while they were moonlighting as hitmen for the mob.
If you've never heard the name Stephen Caracappa, listen up, because this is the story of one of the most corrupt cops to ever wear a badge. Stephen Caracappa was once a respected detective with the NYPD, but over time his story takes a dark and twisted turn. He became known as the notorious mafia cop, alongside his partner and former officer, Louis Ippolito. Now, Caracappa joined the NYPD in 1969, eventually working his way into the organized crime homicide unit, giving him some dangerous access to mafia intel. Unlike his partner, Luis Ippolito, who had deep mafia ties, Caracappa didn't come from a criminal background, but suspicions about his loyalty surfaced as early as 1983. By 1985, Caracappa and Ippolito are working secretly for the Lucchese underboss, Anthony Gaspipe Casso. For $375,000, they leaked intel, sabotaged investigations, and even carried out mob hits. Between 1986 and 90, they're involved in at least 8 murders, including the high-profile executions of James Heidel, Bruno Facciola, and Gambino capo Eddie Lino. And after Caracappa would retire in 1992, the duo moves to Las Vegas, where they continue dabbling in crime, plotting hits and even targeting high-profile mob figures like Sammy the Bull Gravano. And while Caracappa was working as a prison guard, Ippolito's chasing Hollywood fame, boasting about their past like it's a badge of honor. However, their criminal run ended in 2005 when the DEA and FBI finally caught up with them, arresting him at a restaurant near the Vegas Strip after years of investigation and damning testimony. In 2006, Caracappa was convicted alongside Ippolito for a long list of crimes, including murder, drug trafficking, and racketeering, in what prosecutors called the most violent betrayal of the badge in New York's history. This guy's given life in prison plus 80 years just to be safe and a $4.25 million fine. But even behind bars, his story didn't end. A decade later, in 2016, he begged for compassionate release due to terminal cancer, but the judge said nah, citing the scale of his crimes, which included 8 brutal killings, one of which was a mistaken identity. And just a year later, Mr. Caracappa died in prison at the age of 75.
Roger Rogerson, once a decorated detective turned crooked cop and eventually convicted murderer.
Rogerson is one of the country's most notorious dirty detectives who, at the time of his death, was serving a life sentence for murder.
Just like Caracappa, former officer Roger Rogerson was a very dirty cop. But unlike Caracappa, he operated more discreetly until he got caught. Roger here joined the NSW Police Cadet Service at just 17 years old and soon found himself in the Armed Hold-Up Squad. That's a unit known for hard-edged detectives. By the 1970s, he's working high-profile cases like the Toe Cutter gang murder and the Whiskey A Go-Go nightclub fire in Brisbane. He racked up at least 13 awards for bravery and outstanding police work, including the Peter Mitchell Award in 1980 for arresting escaped armed robber Gary Purdy. Rogerson was known for his charisma, sharp intellect, and nerves of steel, so much so that many thought he could one day become police commissioner. Now, behind the scenes, things were far from clean. Roger here had started building shady ties with Sydney's criminal underworld. He's linked to infamous figures like crime boss Abe Saffron, hitman Christopher Dale Flannery, and heroin trafficker Arthur Nettie Smith. In 1981, Rogerson, who the people saw as this outstanding cop, literally shot and killed heroin dealer Warren LaFranchi in a Chippendale laneway, claiming it was self-defense. The coroner backs him up, saying it was in the line of duty, but a jury doesn't agree it's self-defense. Meanwhile, LaFranchi's girlfriend, Sally Ann Huckstep, publicly accuses Rogerson of murder. She claimed he stole $10,000 in bribe money and killed LaFranchi over a drug deal gone sideways, one involving other corrupt cops. Huckstep goes as far as campaigning against Rogerson, and all of a sudden, she's found dead. In 1984, Rogerson's linked to the attempted murder of undercover detective Michael Drury. Now, Drury had been shot through the kitchen window of his Chastwood home after allegedly refusing a bribe to tamper with evidence in a heroin case. Rogerson was eventually acquitted of that murder, yet the criminal accusations against him just kept piling up. By 1986, it would all come crashing down. Rogerson was dismissed from the police force after depositing $110,000 into bank accounts under a false name, a move that landed him a conviction for perverting the course of justice. He serves time in prison, but by 2005, he's jailed again for 12 months. This time for lying to the Police Integrity Commission alongside his wife, Ann Malacco. Now, when he gets out in 2006, Rogerson's quite infamous. Instead of shying away from the spotlight, he embraces that infamy by joining stage shows, publishing his own memoir, and even doing reviews for different crime shows, all while still being an active criminal. Yeah, you heard that right. Even though he was over 70 years old, Rogerson was still involved in the criminal underworld, and by 2014, he and a former detective, Glenn McNamara, murdered a 20-year-old student and drug dealer named Jamie Gow. The killing happened at a Padstow storage shed during a botched $3 million meth deal, and CCTV caught everything. So, in 2016, both men are convicted and sentenced to life without parole, which was basically the court making sure that there's no way for Rogerson to make it out. He's incarcerated at Long Bay Prison, where his health deteriorated fast. It got to a point where he was too weak to even sit up, feed himself, or even stay awake. And then on January 18th, 2024, Rogerson suffered a tragic brain aneurysm in his cell. This guy was moved to Prince of Wales Hospital, but dies on January 21st at the age of 83.
Police have now confirmed the suspect, Zephan Zaver, bought a handgun and some ammunition just days before the shooting.
Zaver started work at Avon Park Correctional Institute as a correctional officer trainee. The Department of Corrections says he resigned exactly 2 weeks ago.
On January 23rd, 2019, Zephan Xavier walked into a SunTrust bank in Sebring, Florida, and murdered 5 women in a cold, calculated attack that rocked the small town to its core. Originally from Indiana, Xavier's life had been filled with red flags from early on. Back in 2014, his high school principal actually contacted the police after Xavier mentioned having dreams about hurting his classmates. His mother promised to get him psychological help, but failed him. And then in 2016, he joined the Army, but that also didn't last. He's discharged after just 3 months. And according to an ex-girlfriend he met while they were both in a mental hospital, he once said he saw the military as a way to legally kill people. In 2017, a woman in Michigan reported him after sending her texts talking about possibly getting killed by police in a suicide by cop situation, or even taking hostages. And despite all that history, the state of Florida still hires him as a trainee prison guard at Avon Park Correctional Institution in November 2018. Thankfully, he didn't kill anybody in here, But he did quit that job just after 2 months, only 2 weeks before the shooting, and just 1 day after buying a 9mm handgun and a bulletproof vest. Now, on the morning of the attack, he sent a chilling text to a former girlfriend in Connecticut saying it was
the best day of my life.
Then, while sitting in the bank's parking lot, he followed up with another message.
I'm dying today. I'm taking a few people with me because I've always wanted to kill people, so I'm gonna try it and see how it goes. Watch for me on the news.
Inside the bank, he forces 5 women to lie on the floor, and then he shoots each of them in the head while they're begging for their lives. Afterward, he called 911 to confess, barricades himself inside, and eventually surrenders after a SWAT team breaks in. The victims were a mix of bank workers and a customer, and all of them had families, children, spouses, people who cared deeply about them, making this incident a complete shocker for the entire community. In March 2023, Xavier pled guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder. His sentencing trial lasted 2 weeks, and a jury voted 9-3 in favor of the death penalty. So on December 16, 2024, Judge Angela Cowden made it official, calling the murders calculated, heinous, and cruel. Xavier's legal team pushed for a life sentence instead, citing his mental health issues and benign brain tumor, and now his newfound Christian faith behind bars. But Judge Angela wasn't buying this, and like many, she was tired of defendants playing the mental illness card after committing senseless violence. She ruled that the brutality of the crime outweighed any mitigating factors, and besides, Xavier showed little emotion during sentencing, though witnesses say he visibly gulped as the judge read her decision. Now, under Florida law, a death sentence triggers an automatic appeal, and thanks to a recent rule change, now allowing an 8-4 jury vote for execution following the fallout from the Parkland shooter's case, his appeal process could get complicated. So if the sentence stands, Xavier's likely spending years, maybe decades, on death row. In Florida, that means solitary confinement in a 6x9 cell, limited out-of-cell time, and minimal access to books, writing tools, or radios. He'll live with the constant pressure of knowing he's going to get executed, though lengthy appeals often delay that reality. And by the way, Florida's method of execution is lethal injection. Now, if his sentence is overturned, he'll spend the rest of his life in prison without parole, likely in a high-security facility like Florida State. And depending on how dangerous he's deemed, he could be placed in general population, protective custody, or solitary confinement. They may give him a cellmate, he may live alone. Xavier was only 27 when he was sentenced, which means that he could easily spend decades in prison, growing old in a place that prioritizes control over rehabilitation. But for the families of the victims, that long road doesn't offer much peace. These poor people have to live with a loss that no punishment, life or death, can ever truly fix.